Hello, everyone. I'm going to be joining Alex, a professional paranormal investigator, on this live this evening. And I just wanted to give a huge thank you to my Patreons before starting this thing out. Goodness, what are we doing? And yeah, just while everybody's showing up, thank you to all of them. I just did a early release to some of the videos that you're going to be seeing now on my page. They're not the reenactment skits, but they're like reenact-esque because I'm reenacting some of the funny conversations I guess I have in my head. So, hi everyone! Your first live, welcome! I'm looking at my notes because I now need notes for this live. I have a professional paranormal investigator joining me, whose opinion I trust. So I'm really excited to ask questions. And there she is! Yay!
Yay! Hey,
How are you doing?
doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm looking up my notes and it was great. I was like, right before I saw your invitation, I was like, I am talking to a professional paranormal investigator and one who I trust, so I'm really looking forward to that. And then you went on. I was
Yay!
like, yay!
Exciting stuff.
Well,
Yeah.
hello, folks that are joining. I imagine if you're joining from my side, you know who I am. But Alex, if you would please introduce yourself. Who are you? What is this paranormal investigation thing? How'd you get into that? I got so many questions. I gotta calm down. So we'll start with that.
Alrighty. So yeah, my name is Alex Matsuo. I am a paranormal investigator and researcher. I've been doing this since, oh my gosh, well, I had experiences when I was a kid, and then when I was old enough to drive, I was doing like the sneaking out late at night, going to the local cemetery. And I lived like 10 minutes away from the Whaley House in San Diego. So, I was heading in that area and stuff. Yeah, I had a super crazy experience when I was about 19, 20. Well, I was technically 19, and then I turned 20 while in the hospital. But I had a really crazy experience with like a near death experience after a car accident. And that ended up getting me a spirit attachment for almost a year. That wasn't the most positive experience, unfortunately. And that actually, I was able to share that story on a TV show called Haunted Hospitals in the last year. And then while my mom and I were dealing with this spirit attachment. This was 2006. 2006. The paranormal community was not what it is now. It was very much underground, still very secretive. I think the TV show Ghost Hunters was maybe a year old. So we didn't have anyone to help us. It was basically the church. We had the church wanting to, basically to help us, which wasn't super awesome. And then we were able to get it resolved. And then I kind of got bit by the bug. I wanted to know more about what I had experienced. And then that ultimately snowballed into, in 2011, I decided after I was done with grad school, I was going to dive into the paranormal, really wanting to research it. And also I wanted to start a team to help people like 19, 20-year-old Alex who needed help and couldn't find it, or at least have a team to offer some clarity on the situation. So I started my team in 2011. And yeah, it's kind of been going ever since. So depending on timelines, I've been doing this since I was 16. But if we're going to count like being a serious investigator, then for about 11 years now. So learned a lot over the years, and it's been an adventure. I'm kind of known on TikTok now as a skeptical believer, or as the debunker of TikTok. I've seen a lot over the years, and it's kind of interesting to see what I've seen over the years and see it on TikTok. And then I'm like, well, okay, interesting. So I've done a lot of cases. When I first started out, I was doing about 8 or 9 cases per year. I've slowed down quite a bit to maybe like 3 to 5 cases per year now. And then during the pandemic, we weren't doing any cases because pandemic. So, but I was doing a lot of online consultations and everything. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. It's what I do now. Being a skeptical believer, I believe in the paranormal. I want to believe in the paranormal, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to believe everything I see or I'm going to validate everything that I see, if that makes sense.
For
So,
sure. And I think it's important to notate some of the differences between mediumship and paranormal investigation. For example, every so often people will send me photos and they'll say, "Do you see what I see in this photo?" And the thing is, when I look at a photo, I readily admit, and I always tell people, I usually send people off to other people when they show me photos or videos or that sort of thing, because
mhm.
as an enthusiast, I'll sit there and be like, whoa, that was wild. As a medium, if I'm going to tap into that, that's a process. It's something I do offer for some people, but that's the thing I have booking on my website. And the thing is, if I am to tap in on an image or a video or something like that, it's on a psychic level. So if the image can be explained logistically, like if somebody's like, oh, that's a lens flare or something like that, it's possible I could pick up on something entirely different that has nothing to do with the lens flare,
Yeah.
which is why when I get that kind of information from people, whether it be videos or photos, I'm always just like, hi, I am a medium. I know where my strengths lie and I know what my strengths are not. And that's debunking things from a
Mhm.
logical standpoint. So that's why, I've told people about you. I'm like, hey, look at your page. I bet I'm over here on this side, but I am motioning to you from my side. So I'm curious, without too much skipping ahead, but if you were to give a basic thing, if somebody were to say, oh, all of that's the same, mediumship and paranormal investigations are the same, what would you say to them?
Ooh, that's a tricky one, because there is some overlapping a bit. There's a bit of cross pollination, but you can also do the two things separately.
Mhm.
So as a paranormal investigator, I am about as psychic as a pile of wet garbage. So I do not have abilities, or at least abilities that would be useful to me on a paranormal investigation. Um, and even when I try, it's like, no, it's not happening. I've only maybe once or twice in my life I've been on when picking up something, but otherwise it's not a muscle I'm exercising. It's something I don't do. As a paranormal investigator, what my goal is to figure out, is there something weird happening here? Is there something anomalous happening here? That's more of the technical term that I use. I tend to lean more towards the academic side of paranormal research, and there isn't a whole academic world to this. It's crazy, especially over in the UK. They're all about this. They are all about this on it from an academic standpoint. So my role as a paranormal investigator is, I hear a report that a place is haunted. I get a case submission from a client saying, "Hey, I think my house is haunted." My role in that is to, all right, well, let's visit and let's see if we experience the same thing that that other people have experienced. Sometimes that means I am doing most of the time I'm doing research. I have a historian on my team now. She's a professional historian. I just give it to her. I said, "Hey, you do this. This is your thing." And she will be the only one, at least when it comes to public historical places, she will be 100% in the know. I've learned, and this is kind of echoing back from a TikTok you just did recently about the Jenny Wade house. I've learned that I can go in there with my own bias and it can totally derail an investigation. So it'd be like me going to the Jenny Wade house and assuming all the spirits I'm going to interact with are from the Civil War or from the Battle of Gettysburg specifically. That might not be the case, but I would go in there with that bias. So basically, what the role of my historian or whoever is 100% in the know, their job is to just keep us on track in terms of, if the name like John Smith pops up, my historian can be like, "Okay, John Smith, he was married, had children, but then abandoned his family. Thank you. I can kind of continue that line of questioning. But my role as a paranormal investigator is to basically see if there's something weird going on. But also a big but here, big but. I'm also like 12 years old, maturity wise, just to warn everybody. I'm also there to debunk. I'm also there to debunk. And that's actually a lot of times what I do is I end up debunking. And it's not that we're purposely looking for debunking opportunities. It just kind of happens. Like, we had a client who every morning at 2:30, her whole house vibrated and she didn't know why. So guess where I'm going to be at 2:30 in the morning when we investigated her house. I was sitting right in the middle of the floor, and sure enough, we felt the house vibrate at 2:30, and I'm like, okay, so something else is going on here. And one of my team members was actually sitting outside in the car to take a nap, and I had radioed him and I said, "Hey, Duke," his name was Duke. I was like, "Hey, we just felt the vibration." And he's like, "Oh yeah, a semi truck just drove by." So we're like, "Oh." But it didn't completely debunk that woman's haunting, though. It just debunked an ingredient of it, if that makes sense. And that's something that I try to tell people when I go through, like when they send me their photos or their videos. I'm not debunking the entire experience. I'm just debunking what I see. It doesn't mean that there's not something going on. And this is something I try to emphasize, especially when I'm debunking the larger haunted TikTokers. I'm not debunking the entire experience. I'm debunking what I see. I'm like, oh, hey, there's string right there. Yeah, there very well could be something paranormal going on, but that right there, that's a string moving that stool,
Mm-hmm.
So
I do the same thing as well. And granted, I don't debunk so much. Like a few years ago, I used to duet videos and kind of talk about them and that sort of thing. But my main thing, I guess, as a spiritualist and working with other mediums is when people ask about my experience, I always say, okay, in my experience. And that's in a way to say, hey, I can have different beliefs from other people, and that doesn't make either of us any less valid, as far as what's going on, what's after we pass, like all that sort of thing. I also appreciated, because we met for the internet who doesn't know this. Alex and Kat, who's Spooktastics, she was gonna come on. She's one of my mods. I'm talk about her all the time. If anybody doesn't know who I talk about all the time. One of the things that what made me interested in wanting to work with you, Alex, was one, you actually believe that something was out there, which I appreciate. I don't know if I'd want to be on a team with somebody who was just like, I don't believe in ghosts at all. I'd be like, okay, then why am I here?
Yeah.
What are we doing? But two, I appreciate how you come at things from a logical perspective, but it's also this open-minded. It's also from your experience, your varied experience through many years at this point, but it's still like yeah, sure, you could be having that experience. That might be happening, but this is what you have, and you don't, I guess, belittle other people for their experiences. That's what I'm saying. I think it's another good point, and you brought this up earlier, how, at least in my mind, and this could be an unpracticed muscle, as you were saying, for me to go into logic mode is like a different side of my brain or something or another from channeling. It is. Yeah, like when you and Kat, which by the way, we did go live. Thank you, I have a hat. We did go live.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that one before. Thank you, Lisa. But we did go live, and when we talk about the Jenny Wade house or the orphanage, that's what we're referring to. The reason why those lives have not been posted yet is because I'm still editing them, because I've got 3 perspectives to do editing on for 3 hours. So it's coming, everybody. If you are not aware of my YouTube yet, now you are, and check that out for when that comes. This live will be posted sooner. But going back to equipment versus mediumship. So when you and Kat were doing the Estes method, one that drives me crazy in general. Like, I have a high respect for people who can like use like an S box and like understand what in the world is coming through.
Yeah.
Exactly. But two, I thought about it because like the temptation was, I was like, I could try it. And then I was like, then I would have to turn off my shielding and my abilities, and I would just sit there and probably just get frustrated, and then something would probably come mess with
Mhm.
me. So I was like, I'd rather have personally straight white noise and like my vision
Right.
in order to do that. But that's how I work, because once again, I readily admit that I'm not, when it comes to equipment, when it comes to debunking, that sort of thing, that is super cool and not my job description.
Yeah. Oh, I understand. It's interesting you say that too, because I've done studies on, in my other life, I'm a theater person. I have a master's in theater. I'm a theater person, and actually I wrote a whole book about the relationship between the paranormal and theater and performers. I've written a whole book about it. Just it was basically part of my master's thesis. But in that book, I talk about how psychics and actors use the same part of their brain. Fiona Shaw, the actress Fiona Shaw, for people watching, she was Aunt Petunia in the Harry Potter movies. She's very prolific on the other in the UK and here too. Like once you see her, like you just know who she is. She put herself through an MRI several years ago as she was having a brain scan, and they would have her recite the alphabet or just count, and then they would have her switch to a T.S. Eliot poem. And the part of her brain that activated when she was acting is like the front part of the brain that's responsible for visualizations. And the American Society for Psychical Research did a very similar study, but it was with a psychic medium to see what parts of the brain activated when they were reading. And it turns out that it was the same section of the brain that activated, which I thought was really interesting. So something to keep in mind. Wolf and Fox, because I'm prepared. The book is called The Haunted Actor.
Good, I was gonna ask.
The Haunted Actor. Yeah, it's on Amazon. You can get on Amazon. I also sell signed copies on my Etsy shop too for a little more money because you got to pay shipping. But yeah, The Haunted Actor. It's just one of several books that I've written. Yeah, it's there's a relationship there. And so just like and where I was going with this was, as an actress myself, when I'm playing a character, it takes a lot for me to switch, like to kind of switch back to like Alex or to switch back to somebody else. And it's not real necessarily method acting, but it's very much when you're on a certain path in your brain, and to stray away from that could be chaotic. It's not easy. So it doesn't surprise me at all that you would say that, because I'm like, well, there's the same part of the brain is activated between, mediums and actors. That totally makes sense. It makes sense to me. So
I love that.
yeah.
That confirmed something that I was making a conclusion for myself, like, goodness, I guess it was like 6 or 7 months ago, because
Mhm.
I am human. Sometimes I doubt myself. Imagine that. And I was going through a time where I was like, it's so hard to have shut this part of myself down, and then like to open it up, and then to make it public, and then like everybody wants to talk about it. And then I was doing consultations and channeling actively, and I was starting to get down on myself. And then all of a sudden, like, brain blast, something or another. I'm out walking with my partner, and I was like, wait, I just realized something. And he's like, what? And I'm like, I've been channeling, or in what you were saying, using that part of the brain all of my life. Like, theater was what I entered because honestly, at that point in my life, I didn't like who I was, and I didn't like my life. And so I started to put on masks and hats, and that's sort of the thing. And that's kind of how I survived for a number of years. Uh, and then it turned into a lifestyle, and then it turned into something that just made me happy rather than something I was living for. But during
Mhm.
that time, during the grind, I had to rely a lot on my instincts, but I wasn't necessarily like channeling what I'm doing now and that sort of thing. So it's funny how all of that kind of came back around and you just proved the science of that. So thank you. That's validation for me.
This is why I love the academic side of the paranormal, because you get nuggets like that. It's like, ooh, got something I can take away, I can take away and bring to other people. And it offers a little bit of validation there, which is nice.
Yeah. I want to get back to my questions, which we've already kind of like answered a few of them. But before I do, I want to give a quick break. One, to just say, hi, everybody who's watching. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to assume, quick thing, all of your links to your books, anything about you is just going to be in your bio, correct?
Yeah, if you click the link in my bio on TikTok, it should take you to basically everything that I'm associated with.
Cool. And obviously the same is for me. Okay. Okay. So we kind of went into this already. In fact, I'm not even going to ask it because there was the original question of how do paranormal investigations work. However, you've already answered that through example, I feel. What you do, how you go into things. I would like to move in further on the questions that I feel like ought to be asked and answered, which a very important one for me is paranormal investigator ethics. What are your ethics? What do you hold your team to when you go out to these places?
That's a great question. So logistically, I mean, this is super business side of it, but so there's a dry businessy side to the paranormal. We read our contracts very detailed. You and I talked about the contract with Jenny Wade and the orphanage, and making sure that what methods we're going to be using is okay with the location. Like with Jenny Wade and the orphanage, we weren't allowed to have a Ouija board or tarot cards, but pendulums were okay, and that's fine.
But we talked about, I'm just saying for anybody who's like, I use tarot cards, is that wrong? No, it's not. They have their rules. We just had to respect them. That's it.
Yep, exactly. It's just one of those, none of the tools that we bring in are important enough to me that I'm going to argue it, because I'm like, we're a guest in their location. Big thing, always have permission to be on the property. If any of you have been following my Ghost Hunts Gone Wrong, I covered one where there was a ghost hunter and her friend were trespassing the central terminal in Buffalo, New York, and she fell through the substation roof and fell 25 feet. Crazy thing about it was this location does offer ghost hunts and ghost tours. So you could do it in a safe environment. Yeah, making sure you have permission to be there. Ethics wise, so we have some rules in our group in terms of how we're going to talk to the spirits. Provocation. So it's more than just, give us a sign of your presence, bro. It's more than that. There's multiple levels of provocation, and there's like really low levels, like minor things. Like an example that I give in one of my books is, this one ghost will come forward if you make the bathroom dirty. So it's like putting toilet paper in the toilet and not flushing it, and putting paper towels in the sink, just minor like annoyances to get her to come out. But then there's the highest level where it's like you're spewing insults and everything. So we want to make sure that we're respecting the spirits, whether or not we believe that they're there or not. And that's the key thing that I think where a lot of skeptics tumble, is if they don't believe in it and they're expecting some sort of proof, sometimes they tend to get disrespectful. Where it's like, well, if you're really here, that kind of thing. And I'm not a big fan of it. It's like, either way, whether you believe they're there or not, you need to be respectful of the spirits that could be there, of the space, and also of the people who are there who do believe in it. So respect is key. Another one, this kind of sometimes annoys my team, not in a bad way, but it's like we try to leave the place cleaner than how we left it. So just taking care of the space, because some of these locations aren't well taken care of. And that could be because of lack of funds, lack of bandwidth when it comes to volunteers. If we can do a little bit of something to make the space a little better, we try to do that. So leaving it cleaner than how we found it. Sometimes it requires cleaning up a little bit of mouse poop, but it happens. Yeah, I think ultimately the biggest rule or ethics that we stick with is respect, and that just covers so many different areas. Respecting the space. If we set up equipment, we're making sure we use painter's tape and not duct tape or any sort of tape that can peel paint off the walls. Really just taking care of the space like it's our home. And really it is. I mean, we're going to be spending like the next 4, 5, 6, 12 hours there. We're going to take care of it. And yeah, just staying respectful in our line of questioning and keeping it an open space too. Because we don't want to make any spirits that could be marginalized, make them feel uncomfortable with coming forward, if that makes sense.
Yes. Some of my commenters are bringing back something that I've talked with, I know I've talked with Emily about, and I talked with Hannah about it too. They're like, bring juice and cookies. I don't know if I shared this with you. I want to do, I don't know if this would be an investigation. It doesn't have to be, but I want to go into a place where, unfortunately, there are so many places where these spirits have been treated so badly. So I just want to go into a place and bring a bunch of cookies and bring a bunch of juice and then just like sit down and like put them all out in a circle and be like, hi, if anybody wants some cookies and juice, like you can set up the equipment and do everything and just be like, and as a medium, I can like push out and be like, all right, so projected thought, we have cookies and juice in this hall. And of course, like we would clean up everything afterwards. But
yeah,
I still, that's an approach to, and initially I said it as a joke, but now I'm kind of like, I really do want to do it. Like, just to see what would happen.
I mean, I've gone to 7-Eleven at 2 a.m. to buy candy for some kid spirits. So I totally see that. Same thing with bringing toys. I mean, you saw that I brought that little teddy bear to the orphanage, and just setting the boundary though. It's like, hey, I'm bringing a friend here. I'm going to take him with me when I go, but you could play with him for now. Yeah, it's totally, that's totally a thing. And I think we need to bring some humanity and some empathy back into paranormal investigating. And I feel like sometimes we could get so focused on the evidence collection that we forget, like, just sit and have some cookies and juice, and talk. It doesn't have to be hard,
I could just imagine how confused some spirits would be, especially at these really, like where we went. I mean, there's a whole tourism market, like just to spirits, and how different it would be if we were just like, hi, well, we know you know what to do in these scenarios, but here's some cookies. Like,
Right. I think spirits now, especially with the ones that are well frequented, like every night there's probably a new group there. I think they've gotten used to like, well, it's the dog and pony show, maybe I'll participate, maybe I won't. But yeah, I actually had, oh my gosh, this was years ago. I want to say this was in 2012, maybe. Might have been 2012. It was in San Antonio, Texas, and we were at the Black Swan Inn. Yes, San Antonio. I have like the old school spirit box, like before like spirit box was a thing. I have like the super old school one. And what was interesting was we were getting words like demon and evil and all this stuff coming through, but I have felt darker entities and I wasn't getting this feeling. Like it's just a vibration that I'll feel. I'm like,
yeah,
okay, no, yes, no. It kept saying like
yeah.
It kept saying the buzzwords, but I was like, I don't feel it. And then the words like pretend and we're just pretending coming through. It's like, they want this from us. And I'm like, oh, that made me really sad for one. And another one of my friends who went there like a year later got the exact same thing, but from a medium who I never knew. I never met her. They didn't know that I had been there the year before. And I had gotten very sweet. And this is where the interesting thing comes in, is like when you correlate experiences, when I didn't know these people back, when I was there. And they're like, yeah, my medium picked up that they're putting on this show because that's what's expected of them. And they just got called demons. And so they're like, okay, well, we're going to act like demons and we're going to act evil. And I don't know, it just kind of made me think of like the kid in the trench coat. Like you open up the trench coat and there's like three or four kids like in the trench coat, like, oh, I'm a demon. Oh no, we're just regular old spirits, you know?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think paranormal media has a lot to do with it and setting up this expectation of just this like of having like negative experiences with, the demons and
Hmm.
nah, it's not nah.
Well, it's the sensationalism of it.
Hmm.
So sad because when you put when you put somebody into a box of sensationalism, it's kind of like, hey, perform, monkey, instead of looking at the fact that these are complex people. They're not
Hmm.
in their corporeal forms anymore. And sure, you run into some human stuff from time to time, which are not all demons. Most of the time, they're not. But anyway, still, I feel like it's so. To me, it's more boring when I look at something and everything's just like, oh, it said demon, that means it's demon. I look at your experience for how you got a feeling. You're like, no, I've had enough experience to know what the difference is, either on a vibrational
Yeah.
level or you just understand. And I think that's far more interesting. I think the story that you told was more interesting because it actually got to what human behavior does, which is sometimes we do things that we think people want, even if it's a lie. And that's exactly what they were doing, which is such a human response. that's what that's what humans do. And it's so sad.
Ghosts acting like humans? What?
Wild. I think
Crazy.
I think too it depends on, mediums and psychics, they'll have different abilities and different strengths. And I know
Hmm.
if somebody were working primarily just off of clairaudience, so the ability to just listen, like to hear with your ears, they might get something, like they might straight up hear a demon, but if they don't have other ways to check themselves, other clairsenses, gut responses, or to just be calm enough to be able to just simply say, wait, I heard that, but is that what I feel? And
Hmm.
it's a hard thing to do, especially in the moment, especially if you're with a team that's like really riled up and they're like, what did they say? But there's so much in remaining calm. And I mean, you saw me when I was with you. Like my comment section was like, you're shaking. I was like, I'm cold. And they're like, you don't look like yourself. I'm tired. Like, but I'm
That investigation is from midnight to 4 a.m. Like,
yeah. So like, but the thing is, none of us ever got crazy excited. Like there were exciting things that happened. We were picking up on
mhm.
things, but I never felt like any of us were losing our sense of balance. And I think that's
No.
important for anybody in those situations.
Yep. Well, and I definitely have to when I'm down in the basement of the orphanage anyway, because especially when you and Kat were starting to validate my experiences down there, and I'm like, I'm like, oh gosh. But yeah, I mean, it's keeping your cool is essential because I've been with people who haven't kept their cool, and it's a disaster to, I hate to use this word, but it's definitely how I feel sometimes. I have to babysit. And I've had people lose their cool on investigations because they just go off into this totally different like space where they just get overwhelmed by the environment, and they start crying or they have this freak out, and it's like, okay, hey, at the end of the day, we're still in control of the situation. And yeah, it's a bit interesting. And I've noticed when I've run public ghost tours, which I rarely do anymore, because I mean, you know what it's like. It's hurting kittens, but not fun or cute or cuddly sometimes. But I definitely dealt with people who at one like sound, they were like, oh God, it's the demon. I'm like, and they were serious. It wasn't just them being facetious. It was, they were serious and absolutely terrified. And I say, hey, go take a step outside, take a deep breath. I got bottled water out there for you, you know, take a drink and take a drink of water, take a deep breath, and come back when you're ready. Or if you don't want to come back, that's fine too.
I think that's important
So,
too, because it's like, just like in life, any conversation, any meeting, any whatever, we should always feel like we need, if we need to leave to get a breath and come back, we should be able to. And think I think due to editing on like these major TV shows, people think that, oh, you're there all the time. I'm like, we don't know that because they're edited. And it's not like we should have to know that, but to assume that people don't take breaks, I think is dangerous. Like, you get in and have these experiences, you should be able to go breathe. And there should be nothing wrong with that. Go breathe. Go do some, whatever you got to
go
do.
get food.
Yeah, go get food. And then if you want to come back, you come back. But otherwise, why? There should be no expectation of that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something that, I've had friends who have been on TV shows, they're regular cast members. When you've been doing this as long as I have, you make friends with people who do make it onto TV. They do get their own TV show, and then you kind of get a special perspective of things. And most of the time, people are at these locations for 12, 24, 48 hours, sometimes even 72. And you're getting the best 45 minutes.
Yeah.
That's it. Then that's it. Like, you don't get the late night visits to Denny's or IHOP or needing to step outside.
I want
Oh my gosh.
reality TV and like show me somebody falling asleep into like their Waffle House like meal, like give me that.
Yeah.
Somebody being like, I've been up for 12, like for way too long, and then just like, that's what I need. Just to break up here.
And I think the non-serious side of the paranormal is what gets spirits more engaged too. Cause, most, I don't know what the experience is for you or your viewers, but a lot of times the most amazing EVPs that I'll catch were from just us having side conversations and, or just totally going like off the rails. And we get like some really amazing EVPs or like the equipment will do something that I'm like, that's interesting. I've never seen that before. Yeah. I mean, rarely it's, rarely do I get a chance to see really incredible stuff happening like in the moment. So yeah.
Okay. So
like 5 stories just popped in my head. Anyway.
I know, and I'm looking at my questions and I'm like, we're just answering this organically. This is great. I did want to ask, kind of going back to Gettysburg. So I have never worked on a paranormal investigation team. My words are great. So I didn't know what to expect, and I know we had met beforehand, and pretty much that conversation was me like taking notes on like, okay, what do I expect here? Where should I go? Where should I stand? Give me my mark. I'll find my light. And the other thing I did before Gettysburg was I put it out of my mind. I knew I was going. I had the plane tickets, and I knew I would wind up there. And from there, besides general knowledge of the Battle of Gettysburg, I was like, I'm not looking up anything, because for every consultation that I do, I don't know people's loved ones. I don't know who they are. I don't know where their house is. So I wanted to do the same thing here, and I went in blindly, like flat out blindly. So I wanted to ask, because I still have yet to do research on the Jenny Wade house. But like, and we talked about this there, which wasn't quite on the live, but I am, for everybody who's going to go back and watch that recorded live, I'm going to share the notes that I took, which we went over before we went live, which were not secretive. I think we just forgot to go live before that happened.
Yeah. There's a lot happening that night.
Yeah. So, like, from what you can remember,
was what I was saying, was that valid? Did you have experiences with those, or proven, or history, or anything like that from what I was picking up?
Yeah, so I will say what I appreciate with you and investigating historic places as a medium is incredibly hard because there's biases everywhere, and literally there's like chairs and paintings and signs that say this clock was here during the Battle of Gettysburg, and there's so much, and there's pictures, and yeah, and actually what was interesting was I thought a lot of what you were picking up that evening, it sounded like you were more tuning into her sister. So Jenny Wade did not live at the Jenny Wade house. That is just where she unalived. Jenny actually lived more central to town, which, I mean, given how big Gettysburg is, it's just down the street. But her sister had just had a baby on June 26th. And so Jenny, her mom, and her brothers packed up their stuff, and because I'm pretty sure her sister, Georgia's husband, I'm pretty sure he had been deployed. So the whole family went to that house to help take care of the newborn baby. And so Georgia was literally like in a nightgown, doing things that newborn mothers do. And then, you're celebrating the birth of this child, and then your sister unalives. And to top it all off, her birthday, Georgia's birthday, was July 4th, which was the day after the Battle of Gettysburg ended. So she went from childbirth, losing her sister, celebrating a birthday in like a week. So yeah, so and not to mention too, so when Jenny Wade had been shot, like it came through two doors, and hit her in the back, she was pretty much gone, I mean, at this point. And so they had to get Jenny someplace safe. They had to get the whole family someplace safe because obviously the house wasn't safe anymore. So they had to cut a hole in the middle of the duplex where the wall separated the two homes. They had to cut a hole in the wall and feed her through the hole in the wall so that they can get down to the cellar. They were down in that cellar for at least a day or two, until the firing stopped. So I feel like with a lot of what you were picking up on, I think you were picking up on her sister, which I've not heard a lot. A lot of it, because it's the Jenny Wade house, it's like people fixate on Jenny. But I've done a lot of research on Jenny and her story and her family story to see, and not a lot of people know that. A lot of people know like what her sister went through or what her mother went through, or this love triangle that Jenny was, well, it wasn't a love triangle that Jenny was involved with. There's a whole story about that. I'll tell it to people later. But I think you were picking up on a lot of stuff with her sister, but also environmentally, what was happening on that day. And that was a lot of trauma. That's a lot of trauma that happened on that day between just the battle, the townspeople trying to make sense of the situation. Oh, I will say, too, in the basement. So you and Kat both picked up on something in the basement, which it's believed to be in the basement that her father, Jenny's father, is down there. Now, Jenny and her father did not have the best relationship. I'm pretty sure he was in prison or a halfway house at the time that she had passed away. So it's believed that, where Jenny's remains were hanging out in the cellar. Oh yeah, by the way, while they're all hanging out in the cellar, Jenny's body is there. There's trauma. So I think there's a belief that her father is there too, kind of watching over the last place where her body was before she was buried. So, but that has manifested into something a bit different. Whether it's like the guilt from living, from when he was alive, or post or afterlife guilt, he's in my opinion, based on the first time I went to the Jenny Wade house in 2011 to today, it seems that he's morphed a bit. He's changed, and I don't know what it's like in the afterlife. How, well, I mean, if we talk about the thing in the orphanage. How can something mold and change, based on just, your state of mind when you pass, but also what other people think about you. So, has he been stewing so much in his guilt and loss that he just kind of morphed into something else? I don't know. So yeah, so what you were picking up on, I was I was impressed with. I was like, okay. And the fact that, you were really trying hard to not,
do that. I was
be,
like this in the notepad. I was like, okay, I know there's a chair there. Okay.
Yep. 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 And also the other thing with Gettysburg, it's such a cluster when it comes to activity. It's such a cluster. There's so much going on. So it can be hard to validate everything that, I hear mediums pick up on. I've had people come through in Gettysburg that weren't even associated with Gettysburg. So I have a theory that between all the reenactments that are happening and all the ghost tours that are happening, it's like we humans have created something out of Gettysburg.
Yes.
That could be like a beacon or a magnet or just one massive portal. I'm kind of about portals, but it could be just one big doorway at this point. Yeah. So it's hard to validate. It's hard to validate that, but then there's some consistencies that I've heard over the years, but then when someone picks up on, say, like her sister, and I'm like, oh, that's new, huh? Okay, let's go with that. Let's go with it. So
something to note too, if anybody's like, why didn't you just ask who she was? Well, basically what had happened for the top of the house, I went around with a notepad and I had 15 minutes. And so I went from room to room to room and I just got whatever reading I could. If I felt like somebody was in there, I would be like, hello. But even then, it's not a full conversation. And some of the spirits there are pretty tapped out. They're very much just like, oh, look, another group. Oh, look, another person can see me. Okay. It's really not exciting for them. At least that's the read that I got from the house. And we had to decide a location to go because the time was kind of ticking down. So we went down to the basement. But I remember in the basement, we were like there and there were some folks around us, and then we got things started and it was like a calling card because suddenly they're like, oh, they pulled out the tech, they're ready for a show. And it felt like folks were coming through the walls. And I was just like, wow, you guys really show up, don't you? Like we've got the tech out. They recognize it. And that is one of those things where I'm just like, I don't feel like all these guys either unalive down here or brought down here, or they may have not even been here at all when they were alive. But it's like they understand the paranormal investigation calling card and they just sweep in. And so, one, thanks for validating that for me too, because as I was walking around the house, I was also getting the feeling, I was like, I feel like some of y'all were not in here for when you were alive. I feel like, so like that one soldier that I found upstairs who was kind of crouched over, I was like, buddy, I don't know what you are doing here, but hello, I hope you are okay. Like, that was something in some of the rooms. I was like, I don't know what you're doing here, but okay. I see that sometimes. The other thing too is spirits, sometimes they move on. Great, cool, that's what they want to do. Other times, even parts of them come back to a place because something has been disturbed. Right. We see this around, graveyards or cemeteries where they get paved over, like with roads, or buildings get built on top of them. That's why Wilmington's so haunted. And that's the thing. You think that somebody's moved on, but then maybe the essence of them comes back, or maybe a residual or something like that comes back. It's something for us, I guess, in the physical to be reminded, hi, there were people here and we used to honor them, and now there is a building. Now you get a haunting. There you go.
Yeah. Gettysburg is prominent for that too, especially so the day after the Battle of Gettysburg, it rained. So and it was a warm rain too. So you have warm rain on all these people over 53,000 casualties, missing, wounded, or unalived during the battle. a lot of them were splayed out all over that battlefield. And then the day after the battle, it's raining. It rained. And so a lot of I'm trying not to get any violations here. A lot of the people in the more shallow burials were exposed. The whole town of Gettysburg was just in shambles after. I mean, it took them years to recover from that. But also the boys in gray, the Johnny Rebs, their remains were not properly disposed of because they were in Pennsylvania. They weren't properly disposed of. Eventually, they were transported down to Hollywood Cemetery in Virginia, but you have a lot of like unsettledness there. And also, some of you have seen, I'm sure some of you have seen those famous photos after the battle. Most of them are posed. Like the photographers would move them and pose them and take a photo. One of the more famous photos that was taken in Devil's Den, that was posed. So not only did you have the battle and just the devastation that happened there, you also had people there who were doing that. So there's a lot happening that I think that has caused residual energy to just permeate the ground of Gettysburg. And that's just back in 1863.
Right. And
that's just 1863.
And I was about to mention the present. The next day, Kat and I walked around, and you can buy things that unalived people, bullets and cannons and bayonets, and it was troublesome. And on top of that, like, there's this tourism, dress up like a soldier and walk around. I'm like, how does that help people who are trying to move on when they look over and they're like, wait, I thought the war was done, like, there's just, and I wrote about some of it on Instagram, and I want to make some more videos, especially when I put the lives out on YouTube, to kind of give more perspective, at least from, I guess, a mediumship point of view, but also a human point of view. At what point is it even possible to let enough go so that people could move on? And I think this is a bit of a segue into Rosa in the orphanage. It's kind of like, if nobody ever said her name again, and I specifically didn't say her last name because at least there's that, which if any of you know her, then you're going to find that really interesting. But anyway, I certainly did. But yeah, like, if no one said her name, if no one went down there and people just lived their lives, and, every time something happened, somebody just moved that energy out, just to be like, oh, she came in here. No, we put our boundaries up here. You're not allowed, like in the apartments upstairs. Goodness, I could not live there. More power to those.
I couldn't do it.
And that's the thing, for cruel people like that in particular, who thrive off of people knowing what they did. Like, would it be better to leave them alone? Like, and how would we even do that? At what point did we as society say, okay, we've had enough? Like, that's a very bad person, so we're just gonna let them sit down there. They get time out. But I don't know how we would even go about that, because people still find it interesting. People, they comment on my videos or my Instagram posts, and they're like, oh yeah, I love Gettysburg. It's so active. If you ever need to have an experience, just go to Gettysburg. And I'm like, at what cost?
Yeah. And this is where I struggle with the ethics too, as a paranormal investigator, because if there's a place to go and research, that's the place. One of the people that I used to follow him quite extensively, but now I'm kind of, I don't know. He coined a investigation methodology, where basically what you do is you dress up in period clothing and you do scenarios, which, depending on the context, I think that's a great idea, because you're bringing something familiar. You're not shoving, like, equipment in their faces, and it's like, hey, I'm wearing clothes like you wore, and I'm using verbiage and terminology that you used and when you were alive. But in Gettysburg, it felt a bit, I don't know, I didn't know if I was contributing, making a positive contribution. And we had our equipment like under our clothing, like, just like, okay, well, let's still collect things. But so what we did, so the method is called the ghost excavation method. The guy who created it, he used to be an archaeologist, and he's extremely academic, like extremely academic. Like I have to, whenever I read his work, I need someone to explain it to me like I'm five. But the scenario that I did is we were all dressed in period clothing. We had these lanterns. We were at a home. Well, it was a farmhouse. It was a hospital. And he wanted us to walk around the field calling out names of people like John Smith of Louisiana, like basically reenact how a family would go looking for their loved ones after the war. I had some pretty crazy experiences when that was happening, but I felt dirty after that, because had that been a spirit who was really looking for their family, I wasn't it. Mm-hmm. So it was, I felt a bit dirty after that. And that's something that I do want to talk about more with investigators, because it was at that moment I felt like I'm using exploitation for the sake of a good video or for a nice audio clip. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So instead of like actively engaging with the entity like a human being, I was tricking them. And that's something that I think happens in Gettysburg a lot, especially as you mentioned with the people dressed in period clothing. You get the reenactments like every year. And then when you get to a milestone anniversary, like 150th or the 155th, I mean, it's a huge thing. Mm-hmm. So I struggle with the ethics sometimes, and I make sure, like, when I do go, it's like, hey, I'm just here to talk to you, like, in a sense, bringing the cookies and the juice, like, let's just have a chat. let's sit and have a chat, and I just want to hear your story if you want to share it with me. Instead of, and in Gettysburg, I don't need to dress up to get something to talk to me. Mm-hmm. I don't need to pretend to be somebody's family. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that experience, if only for the kind of, you did it, you learned, you've moved on, and that sort of thing. I think it's mm-hmm. important that we as humans admit what we learn and how we want to move forward. Mm-hmm. I'm having some interesting communication on my chat right now that I wanted to kind of lead into. So one, I think it's important to note with any kind of highly haunted location, it's going to be different from the other highly haunted location, whether that's a house, whether that's a battlefield, whether that's an entire town. And the reason mm-hmm. why I bring this up is because, we have Fort Fisher out here, which was known as the last stand of the South. What happened there was very gruesome and in a very short amount of time. And the thing is, though, the energy out there, so different. Now, granted, there's not a town immediately right there, so it's a bit different. And of course, Wilmington, mm-hmm. we've got our own stuff going on. But I know from a spiritual sense that because for a long time it was just beach, and then they used it for artillery practice in World War II. And then after that, mm-hmm. it was just beach again. And so a lot of these spirits, one, they kind of woke up about the same time. The artillery practice kind of jogged them out. Mm-hmm. Imagine where you're buried and then like, boom, like that's a lot. A lot of them have been working together to kind of gain further understanding of where they are and why they're there. Mm-hmm. And the most important thing with that is because they've been able to gain that clarity, not only are they more interesting to talk to, as a medium or a paranormal investigator, because they'll sit there, you bring some fried chicken to these guys and they will tell you stories. Oh my goodness. It is, you can just get your Bojangles and put it down. Kat and I did this on the beach. We didn't record anything because it was just for fun, but we were just like, the amount of times we heard like, I think there were 12. We asked them how many were around us at the time. We got 12 and then 2 women. And then every time a dog walked by, you would hear dog, 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 dog. And then you put the chicken out, they're like, chicken, you know, like fried chicken, like mom,
Nice.
like just a bunch of guys talking. Though I bring that up because
Love it.
yeah, it was you're gonna have to come down. Oh my goodness. Like I will show you. We bring chicken and they bring up the fireworks. It's great. But sadly, I think in Gettysburg, so often there's a lot of folks that are being trapped in their time period, which doesn't allow them to grow. And more importantly, it doesn't allow them to make the choice of whether or not they want to be there, which finally taps into people are asking, they're like, is it a requirement either as a medium or paranormal investigator to, if you find someone, to move them on? And the answer that I have to that, and I'd love to hear yours and your experience with that, but the answer I have to that is it is always the individual's choice on what they want to do. And the best thing that I can do is let them know in their own comfort level where they are and what happened in as delicate a way as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my answer. Have you ever been in a situation where, I don't know, you felt like somebody needed to move on or something like that? Like, what was that like for you?
Oh yeah. Yeah, so I've always felt funny about moving spirits on because I feel like, well, who am I to move someone on? Because also I don't know what the heck is going on the other side. But it's hard in Gettysburg because when you have someone like Rosa, oh kitty,
Yeah, he had to come in.
when you have someone like Rosa, who probably doesn't want to move on because she's probably terrified as F about what could be waiting for her on the other side. Whether she's destined for an afterlife of misery or not, you know what I mean? Or there could be an afterlife of forgiveness waiting for her. You know, we don't know, but given the time period and the context where she was alive, she's probably more likely believe in the Christian mindset of heaven or hell.
Mm-hmm.
And she's probably not going to want to move on because she's like, I know what's waiting for me. I'm not going. At least that's what's in the times I've tuned into her. That's what I've felt.
Yeah.
Not when I wanted her to. Yeah.
It's the power she has over that place, the power she has over kids, which also yep.
Yeah, but then when I go someplace else that's not famous or anything like that, I kind of do the same thing that you do. This is why I don't like asking spirits if they know that they're unalived, because they may not know, or they do, but it's very confusing for them, and I just don't want to cause that issue. Mm-hmm. But delicately, I may say something to the effect of, well, it's 2022 now. Like when we went to, oh my gosh, St. Albans Sanatorium, you know, we asked the spirit in the boiler room who the president was, and he said Clinton. And this was right about the time that, you know, his wife was running, and again, try not to get violations here. I was like, oh, well, wait till you hear who's running now, you know? And then you literally hear him go, what? We were like, oh yeah. So just finding a way to let them know without being like super direct about it. And then just letting them know, like, you know, you don't have to stay here. I'll usually say something like, I don't know what the rules of the afterlife are, but there's a whole world out there. You can go and explore. And I try to also say something similar in Gettysburg too. It's like, hey, go to Philadelphia, go to DC, you know, go check out the world. You know, I'll just say, hey, you don't have to stick around here. You can go explore. And I mean, also, like I said, too, I've had spirits come through in Gettysburg that had nothing to do with the place, like absolutely nothing. And I'm like, okay, that's a choice, but cool. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
I know you've been to the USS North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
When I went there with a friend, so it was great because she's also a medium. So like we just went around. The guys were super excited about us because they were like, wow, usually when people can see us, they're a lot older. So like you get a bunch of guys rolling out and like, hey girls, you know, I'm like, hello. Um, it's
They
like,
always get excited when there's girls. Like,
yeah, well, I imagine too the amount of guys who go through that place, especially male investigators, they're like, oh man, we got some other guys, you know. But I remember I ran into a number of people who, one, I mean, most of the people did not pass on that ship, which is history.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
I ran into guys who were like, oh yeah, I'm Army, Vietnam. I was like,
yeah.
what? I was like, Vietnam? That wasn't with the ship. They're like, yeah, I know. I just like it here. I was like,
That
okay.
happens. That happens. So we kind of did a little mini ghost excavation method for our first trip, but we had all the girls dressed up in really nice, pretty like 1940s dresses. We did our hair in victory rolls, and we weren't trying to evoke anything. We were just like, oh, looking for an officer to take us out the night of the town. Let me tell you, that place was hopping that night. Like having a bunch of girls on the ship dressed up real pretty. Getting around that ship in heels was extraordinarily difficult. Never again.
I bet you
But
had spirits being like, ma'am. It's just like,
oh yeah, we kept feeling our arms getting touched, and we even like did this thing where we were like dancing. We were dancing around, and we started in the enlisted quarters, and then we moved on to the officers, and the enlisted guys were like, "Oh, why are you going over there?" Like we could hear it on like our spirit boxes and our audio. We also brought cigarettes. We brought alcohol. We brought pictures of girls and like pinup girls, and it was just a really fun night. However, if we wanted to ask about World War II, they did not want to talk about it with us. They were like, "Nah, we're not talking about that tonight. We want to dance. We want to do all these things." It was a delightful evening. And then our second trip was a bit more somber, but we didn't dress up or anything. We were kind of more of like, we're investigators. But we still had really remarkable experiences. I think we just touched base with a completely different demographic when we went that second time. But yeah, that first time we dressed up in pretty dresses and, played music from the era and, got our transatlantic accents out. And we were just like very much having a nice old time. And the other thing was one of my team members her great uncle was a photographer for the Navy, and he actually took photos of Pearl Harbor, like photos that you would never see in the public, and they were pretty gruesome. She gave the photos to one of the guys, and they went down to the mess hall and laid out all those photos and said, "Hey, do you know what happened here?" Because the North Carolina was one of the first ships to get to Pearl Harbor after the disaster, and they had some pretty interesting experiences, but literally they would not talk about it when the women were around. So we had to separate. Like, okay, boys, you need to go down to where the boys would be, and us girls were going to be hanging out like in the social halls. And it was very interesting. But then the guys did get some communication with those photos, and a lot of it was just like, oh, I remember that. Yeah, I remember that. It was a lot of like, I remember, and like, yeah, it wasn't my first time on a World War II era ship either. And one of the times I went there, I talked about my grandfather, and my grandfather was Japanese American. And once I talk about that, holy cow! Like equipment goes crazy. They're like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, my grandfather served in the U.S. Army in World War II as a Japanese man, and it was never anything negative. Like there were no slurs coming out or anything like that. It was just very like, okay, tell me more. And which that's a whole other like emotional evening of things that happened. But yeah, it's interesting when there's so many different kinds of methods of communication, of instigating that communication without having to sit in the dark and say, give us a sign of your presence,
Yeah. And
so
I love
that went off on a whole tangent.
it's so, I mean, this kind of goes full circle. It's bringing it back to the human element, and the human element is not everybody wants to talk about how they passed. Not everybody wants to talk about why they're there. Sometimes people are just like, ooh, women, pretty dresses, like pinup girls and like dancing and that sort of thing. And that's why I know if I'm trying to talk to a spirit that perhaps is not as aware of what year they're in or something like that, I'll try to dress either more conservatively or
Oh
I went to the Bergwin Wright house to do a live with
yeah.
their
Yeah.
director of the museum. And I dressed up because why? In that house, it would have been expected to dress up as a guest. And so I was like, I want to be here like looking good, because if I went there in like jeans and a t-shirt, I'm sure, you know, some of them would still be cordial to me, but it has an effect when you put effort into all of you. You know, suddenly, like I was having a conversation with a woman who didn't speak to me before that particular time. I'm not entirely sure why, but sure, if the dress did it, then great, I win.
Yeah. It's interesting how things can change, you know, just based on what you're wearing or yeah. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, we've gone a little bit over an hour. I think I have a date with just like watching a movie later. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I drank all my wine. I was like, on a date with, you know, drinking wine and watching a movie on a Monday night, but no wine for me. But I want to say
It's all
thanks
good.
for joining. And I know a lot of my folks who are more into the spirituality of all of this. I know I've been reading a lot of comments of people who, one, respect your open mindedness, respect your respectability as far as being able to look at people and understand that your experience may not match theirs. And but also your ability to clear cut look at a situation and be like, okay, so maybe not that, but maybe this, but not that. The strings, as you mentioned
Yeah.
at the very beginning, being like, I see the strings in the video.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. This was fun. Like, it's nice to also talk to you again since, you know, the investigation, you know, a couple weekends ago.
Goodness, was it that long? Oh my goodness, it was 2 weeks. Whoa, time.
I know.
I
I know.
I should have taken your advice about drinking water the next day. I saw your video and I was like, you were smart. I did not drink enough water the next day. I was like, and coffee.
Oh, I drank so much water. I always get really hungry and really thirsty after an investigation. Like, yeah, it's weird. It's odd.
Yeah, but I'm glad to have you on. For anybody who may have missed part of it, this will be up on YouTube later. I'll be sure to tag you. And for anybody who is interested in reading any of your books or seeing your interviews or anything like that, I know all of that is on your bio. You are the spooky stuff. I follow you, of course. So anybody from my page, I do highly recommend. Also, your content is both educational and funny. So that's good.
Yay. Sweet. Yes, and of course I follow you too because I love your content and I love the way that you engage and communicate with spirits. You definitely, as I mentioned earlier, definitely bring the humanity and the empathy back into spirit communication.
Well, thank you.
So,
Well, I think you do too. So, yay. All right. Cool. Well, thanks everybody for joining and have a great night. Thanks for joining yourself, Alex. I will see you later.
all right, see you later. Bye.